Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of where we meet the filmmakers competing in Stafford Film Festival. So today we have Josh Mccausland, I hope I've said it right, and with his experimental film Somnus. This film is really of interest, and it's really interesting to hear the backstory. So let's get straight to it, and we're going to dig into our questions for today.
Thanks for the nice intro, by the way. So the film really stemmed from I'm a composer as well, and I made the music about 2 years before I actually made Somnus. And it was just sort of sitting around. And as I was listening to the album, planning for a release for the album, the pandemic happened, and I was in Chicago, and the world was kind of shut down. And the winter landscape for Chicago just felt so cinematic. And I hit up a friend of mine, and the two of us concepted this film around. It's technically like a short film visual album of sorts. And yeah, we filmed everything in 2021 when things were still kind of shut down in Chicago. And it all kind of stemmed from corporate angst, as we all have kind of dealt with, just this feeling of like working your whole life for a company that it may or may not necessarily invest back into you. Yeah. So I'm definitely a filmmaker who's very interpretive. A lot of the times I like to make things where people can kind of build their own narrative out of it, which is I like to start conversations with my work. So this one really centered around isolation in a lot of ways. It stems from just being alone. A lot of it was influenced by the pandemic when people are sort of separated, dealing with a lot of things by themselves. But also there's this idea of isolation within corporations of they approach themselves as we're this diverse, amazing, welcoming company. And then you sort of join and you're just another number. And that's kind of where a lot of this sort of came from, that idea. Yeah, I'm a big fan of silent films. I grew up on silent films, and I love just hearing music and seeing visuals. I think you kind of get immersed into a world differently than you would have with dialogue or traditional linear storytelling. But with Somnus, it feels like this unraveling of the internal psyche of a person. And I think it feels that way because there's really not too much dialogue. The only dialogue you really hear is the commercials, the voiceover from the corporate identity guy. And that sort of just like really feels alone. You feel so isolated, and the music kind of builds in a certain way. There's certain things, like themes that come in and out. Yeah, it just felt really, really abstract and really unique. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, well, thankfully, we only had a crew of two people. It was myself and my friend Glenn, who's based out of Atlanta. He's one of my closest friends, and we produce films together. And then Miguel, who was on screen the whole time, also a really close friend of mine. So it was pretty much just the three of us hanging out, having a great time, freezing our butts off. But it was pretty easy to direct because Miguel's a great actor. And I also, when we talked about the film, I just kept trying to nail home the idea of like the character's so alone, and like the whole world around him is continuing to move while he's kind of stuck. And he really nailed it. I think he's just did a great job for what it ended up being. Also, Chicago ended up being like a secondary character in the film, and for me that was really important because I love Chicago. I still hold a lot of Chicago pride, but winter in Chicago in particular, for all people who have lived there, is brutal. I mean, it's cold. It's so cold, and so Chicago kind of ended up being this supporting character, and Miguel's performances, they came through really genuine because like the scenes where he's in the lake and he's freezing and he's red, like it was so cold, and he kind of pulled out this amazing performance because he's frigid. I felt really bad about it. I mean, we all got pretty sick afterwards, but we recovered. But I think that was really cool to see Chicago be this sort of like supporting actor in the whole time. Yeah. So Somnus really was kind of like this one-off sort of experimental creature. I will say it's the lowest crew I've ever had. It's the smallest crew I've ever had. We we did a lot with two people, and Glenn and I produce all of our films together now. We've got a couple other fests or a couple other films in festivals now, with crews from 10 to 30. But we've never done something quite so small as Somnus. Somnus was almost like the flint that built like a relationship that we've built over years, and we kind of always look back at Somnus like, dang, look at we did this with nothing. So I think from that standpoint, we learned a lot. And I think for me, I always approach my personal projects. I make music. So if I end up being like, this could be a film, we start from there. But yeah, it's opened a lot of doors for me as a composer too, which has been really nice. It's definitely a departure from my music in the past. And I think the people who really like it seem to gravitate with the type of music I made for that one. So it's fun. It's like being a kid at summer camp again. You know, you got your like you said, mates. I would say friends or something in the States, but yeah, you've got your friends and you've got this crazy idea. You know, I had the two of them come up and crash at my apartment. It was like a 2 bedroom in Chicago, a tiny little spot. And my wife also was a part of the crew too. Sometimes she was coming out and taking pictures and things like that. But no, it felt great. I mean, we had a really tight schedule for 5 days, and the weather decided to shift to even colder the 5 days we were filming. And yeah, it was super fun. I mean, we're out the early mornings. I will say the lakeshore shots and the underneath the train shots in particular were brutal. And